Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight, a shocking discovery leads to a murder mystery.
Police emergency. Oh, hi there. I believe there's part of a body in a garbage bag in the dumpster.
This really was a bizarre file in that it was a true whodunit.
Just not making any sense. As the days go on, it's getting harder and harder to cope with.
If somebody knows something, there's got to be somebody out there that knows.
Really, at that point, your head's kind of spinning, like, what do we have?
They'd start tracing last footprints of life. When he was last seen, who last saw him.
This individual took a lot of steps to try to cover their tracks.
I just miss him so much. I can't tell you how much I miss him.
Here now is Nancy Hixt with a deadly betrayal.
On a cold day in January of 2006, a middle-aged man pushed a shopping cart through the labyrinth of Calgary's inner-city alleys. He hit every dumpster on a quest for bottles when he made a grisly discovery.
Huge black bag, and it was just kind of folded over in the corner. And there was nothing on top of it or anything. Just opened the bag and looked in and, oh, geez, hey.
At first, David Horseman was leery to go on camera, still shaken by the disturbing find.
And, oh, yeah, that's a person, man. There used to be a person, and it just kind of freaked me out, you know. It's got a hand, it's got muscle, it's got a tattoo.
Unsure of what to do, Horseman found someone to call 911.
You got to say something to somebody because some mother's missing a child.
Police emergency. Oh, hi there. I believe there's part of a body in a garbage bag in the dumpster. Like a complete arm with like blood on it and stuff.
An arm?
That's coming right away, right?
Oh, they'll be there very quickly, yes.
Yeah.
I was actually off duty at the time and got a call that an arm was located, a severed arm was located in a dumpster in just off of our downtown area. And that the area was contained by patrol officers, and that's really all I had initially. And so driving there, I was pretty sure this wasn't going to be a legit call.
Cliff O'Brien is a veteran investigator with the Calgary Police Service with 30 years of experience. He's now a superintendent, but in 2006, he was a detective with the homicide unit.
Believe it or not, we've actually had calls similar. And we have responded and we found mannequin parts, or in one case we were told that there was a severed hand, and when we got there, there was a glove that had been frozen up in the ice, and so it looked like a hand, but in fact it was a glove. So I was pretty convinced that this was going to be another one of those types of calls.
But when he arrived at the inner city back alley, the worst was confirmed.
Our forensic crime scenes unit began a real preliminary look into the dumpster, and in particular this heavy-duty garbage bag that the bottle picker had found, and sure enough there was a severed arm in there. Really at that point your head's kind of spinning, like, what do we have, where is the rest of the victim? Who would have done this? What is this, some type of payback? I've not seen that in my career up to that point for sure, and so that was very unusual.
At that time, two rival gangs were in the midst of a deadly war in the city of Calgary.
During that gang war, like, you know, people are trying to send messages and whatnot, and so we just weren't sure, is this part of that gang war or is this something different?
Officers went door to door looking for clues.
One of the things we have to avoid is tunnel vision. Is this an organized crime hit? Is it a domestic? Like, we just didn't know. Is it somebody just disposing of the body, in which case where's the rest of the body? So I had lots of questions, but at the end of the day, we just had to follow the evidence. We did not find anything helpful with the neighborhood inquiries, but if you don't do them, you don't know. And so there was nothing that really came to light from that at all.
The biggest priority was identifying the victim.
I was pretty convinced that probably the victim was deceased at this point. Really, the issue now is who is the victim, obviously who did this, and where is the rest of the victim. We did not have a lot to go on. We knew that fingerprints were eventually going to be done, but we have to preserve the evidence. The evidence at this particular point is the body part. And so what we did not want to do is disturb any of the evidence that might be under the nails, that might be on the fingertips. There may be fiber on the arm, there may be hair, other evidence. And so taking a photograph of tattoos and starting that search was much safer as far as preserving the evidence and doing fingerprinting.
The primary investigator was able to give me a description of the tattoo that was on the arm. So I was doing a lot of time hunting through not just the databases that we have, looking for any kind of descriptors, but also reaching out to correctional service and the jails to see if they have anyone in their database that would match that tattoo. Usually what happens when I'm checking it is something will jump out. Like I'll read a case file or I'll read a person's background and it just clicks. For the circumstances that we're seeing, it just makes sense that it's this individual. And then I'll start digging in, a little bit further, and I see associates in the area, or I see like a recent conflict, or something happens to go, this is likely our person, and nothing was coming up for that. There was no missing persons files. There was no really significant hits on the tattoo.
Coming up, can police identify whose severed arm was thrown in the trash and why? Welcome back. Police work to track whose severed arm was recovered, leaving one family devastated and searching for answers. Here's Nancy Hixt with a deadly betrayal.
Police took the dumpster away for further examination, as investigators exhausted every means possible to identify the victim.
So through fingerprints, we were able to identify that the severed arm belonged to Chad Largy.
So my next step on that is to start looking into his background to see why he's ended up, or part of him has ended up in the dumpster. So I'm looking at his background, his associates, who he's hanging out with, what he's been involved in.
Court documents revealed Chad Largy faced a drug charge.
So I learned that he did have a criminal history and he did have criminal associates. There was a couple of people on his associate list that were quite well known to us and had fairly significant criminal histories.
He was due to go to trial in early 2006 for possession of marijuana, which was a controlled substance at the time.
We knew that Chad had some history with the police, but it was fairly minor for the most part. We were able to track down some of his family, and my partner and I drove out to talk to his mother.
Superintendent Cliff O'Brien still remembers that first meeting with Chad Largy's mother.
When you do these next of kin notifications, everyone takes a little bit from you. In this case, we're telling a mother that your son is dead. We're telling the mother once she kind of comprehends that he was murdered. And then eventually we're telling her that we only found a body part. And that is probably the most difficult next of kin notification I've done.
I found out it was just his arm that they had found. It just broke me into little pieces because it was so brutal. The time I close my eyes, all I see is garbage bags and cut up body parts.
As you can imagine, she's devastated. She is wondering what happened. She's wondering who he was out with, who would be the monster to do something like this.
It's just not making any sense. And as the days go on, it's getting harder and harder to cope with.
Still in shock, Chad's mother didn't know how to share the devastating news with his little sister Miranda.
The owner from the bar came up to me and he said, is your name Miranda Harris? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, I have an important message for you. Your mom said it's emergency. You need to call home right away. My mom said to me, she said, I have something I have to tell you and it's gonna hurt. And I was like, what? And she's like, it's something to do with Chad. And I'm like, is he okay? And she's like, no.
Chad was 5 years older.
I seen him probably about a week and a half before it happened. So, I mean, I didn't even get to say goodbye or tell him that I loved him or anything like that. Like, last time I walked out the door, I didn't think it'd be the last time I ever saw him. So I was just like, oh, I'll see you later, and I ran out the door, and he never said anything back. I didn't talk to him, nothing since then. Definitely lots I'd like to say to him. And tell him how much I love him. Definitely. It's hard.
Miranda vowed to keep looking for her brother.
You hear about things like this on the news and stuff in different cities, and when it really happens to you, it's the worst pain you could ever feel. I would never, ever wish on anybody. I never would. But I need answers. I need to know that, you know, I can have a funeral for my brother and put him to rest and let him know that he's in peace and, you know.
At that point, the only real clue police had was Chad's arm. But his family was able to help fill in some blanks so officers could retrace his steps.
We're asking who are his friends, who would he be hanging out with, where might he be? But really what she did was she led us to Chad's dad. As far as she knew, Chad's dad was with Chad that night, and that would be our next starting point.
His father said on January 18th, 2006, Chad went out to a bar with friends.
Chad's dad admits that he had been out with Chad that night, and that he was actually called by Chad to give him a ride to home, to give him a ride home. On the way home, though, Chad was quite upset at his best friend that he had been out drinking with. His best friend was Dean Commanda. And Chad told his dad that he was upset at Dean and that instead of going home, he wanted to go to Dean's house. Chad's dad drove Chad to Dean's apartment building. He said that Dean came down and met them and then asked Chad's dad to go buy some pop so that they could have some mix for their drinks. That was the last time that Chad's dad saw Chad alive, is what he told us.
Investigators were able to pull surveillance video from the downtown Calgary bar that showed Chad leaving early in the morning on January 19th.
One of the things I want to do is, again, we have to follow the evidence. So we were able to take a look at phone records and we were able to see who phoned who. And so that helped us. We also went and grabbed video footage from the store where the pop was purchased. So it became clear to us that the dad was being truthful with us at that point. And so now we have to try to track down this Dean Commanda and talk to him about what happened, because that's the last known person that we know of that was seen with Chad.
After the break, homicide detectives realize they are dealing with a true whodunit. Welcome back. As investigators retrace Chad Largey's final steps, a stranger makes distressing admissions. We now return to a deadly betrayal.
This really was a bizarre file in that it was a true whodunit, and it started with a bottle picker that called us because of a severed arm found in a dumpster. Like, that is something in movies or in novels. It was quite bizarre.
Given the disturbing circumstances, the case became extremely high profile. Police turned to the public in hopes someone would come forward with information about Chad Largey's death.
And the investigators are asking for public's assistance to determine what Chad Largey's whereabouts were and activities were in relation to Wednesday, January 18th to Friday, January the 20th. We do know that Chad Largy was at a friend's house during this time as well.
Chad's mother pleaded for answers.
We were so close that I just feel like there's a piece of me missing. And I hope someday that piece will come back. I just miss him so much. I can't tell you how much I miss him.
Then, a shocking and unexpected development.
We did have somebody come forward to us during this investigation, and they actually confessed. And they confessed to killing Chad.
Investigators hoped it was the break they were looking for. They used holdback information to try to verify the claims of the alleged killer.
Holdback is evidence that only the offender and the police would know about. And so if we release holdback to the community and everybody knows about it, then what ends up happening is, depending on our tactics down the road, perhaps in a confession or whatnot, we find that we can't verify the truth or the veracity in somebody's statement.
Superintendent O'Brien said investigators quickly realized it was a false confession.
Because of the holdback that we did not release, we were able to determine that they were lying, they had mental health issues, and so we were able to eliminate that individual as not being involved in the case at all.
Only investigators and the killer knew about further graphic and disturbing evidence that was recovered from the dumpster.
Another heavy-duty garbage bag that looked just like the first one, and when they opened that up, they found a second arm. We found a left arm and a right arm, and it was pretty clear that one of the arms, a saw or some type of cutting instrument, had been used to sever that arm, and the other arm still had its joint, and so it appeared as though somebody had cut around the tendons and then pulled it out of the joint.
Investigators had both of Chad Largy's arms, but despite exhaustive searches, no other remains were found.
We had numerous psychics that called and spoke to both us and then ultimately to the family. And they would provide information as to where Chad supposedly was. Of course, none of that ever panned out. It was a waste of time, and what it felt like to me when I talked to the family is that the family would get a tip from a psychic or wherever. They would get very excited that this might be the tip. This might be it, and either they would go or we would send patrol officers to go and look at the area that the psychic said Chad was at, and of course Chad wasn't there, and it was deflating for the family, and that happened numerous times over that first week.
Then, yet another tip.
Because of the publicity on this particular file, we did get a call from the RCMP just outside of town. And the RCMP officers had gone to a call where a rancher said that somebody had trespassed onto their property and had burnt a bunch of items. The burnt items were cutlery and bowls and some knives. And then one of the other pieces that we found was a coil that had been burnt. And when you take a closer look at it, it was a doorstop. It was a coil doorstop that normally you would have behind a door, so when the door opens in your residence, that the doorknob doesn't hit the wall and cause damage. Didn't really seem like it would be related to Chad's murder, but you never know, and so I asked for forensic crime scene unit to go out and examine the burn site. It appeared to be a large truck with dually wheels, and there was snow out there, so we could see those tire tracks in the snow, and it was very, very clear. We also saw some footprints in the snow, and you could tell some of the tread pattern in the snow, so that was very important for us. There was an awful lot of things there, and we're still trying to piece it together. Is this related? Is it not related?
And then they stumbled upon something that didn't seem to fit within the burned up scene.
Our sergeant of our forensic crime scene unit phoned me, and she was quite excited. She said that while she's standing there, and this is a very, very open area, it's an open field. She said while she's standing there and she's supervising her members that are processing the scene, that a piece of paper, a small piece of paper, basically blows by her, kind of rolls on the ground because of the wind, and she literally steps on it, puts her foot on it, and picks it up and reads it. It's a receipt from a store in Calgary, and it's for minutes that were purchased for a cell phone.
Could this receipt, found miles from the inner city dumpster, be related?
We do go to the store, and we are able to pull the video that the store had for the time that was stamped on the receipt. And what we see is Dean Commanda in the store buying minutes for his cell phone. We knew from talking to both the mom and dad that Dean and Chad were best friends, and they have been best friends for a long time. Sometimes being lucky is okay as an investigator. And so, again, what are the chances that this small piece of paper didn't get burned at the burn site, or that it didn't blow away before we got there or after, or wasn't destroyed some other way? So it was a piece of luck. When we go back and take a look at the burn site and all the utensils and the things that were there and that doorstop, we started to wonder perhaps there was a significant amount of cleanup that was being done and people were trying to destroy evidence. We did talk to Dean on the telephone. Dean didn't want to come in for an interview, and he said that Chad had slept at his house that night and then left in the morning. And he didn't know what happened to Chad or where he went after. The police had had lots of dealings with Dean Command over the years, so he was known to the police. There was drugs for sure, and we know that there had been some grow-ups and whatnot, so for sure there were drugs. Generally, when there's drugs, there's some type of violence as well, whether reported or not. He did become a suspect at that point. Between the burn site and what we found there, in conjunction with the video of him buying those minutes, he definitely became a strong suspect.
That's when investigators learned Dean Commanda was a suspect in another crime.
We uncovered that Dean was a suspect in arson. And it was an arson of a U-Haul truck that had just been rented by Dean the day before. He's a suspect because he was the one that rented the truck, and we have the receipt of when he rented the truck. We have the date, we know what the mileage was on the truck, and that it was due to be returned the next day, and it just didn't show up returned. It ended up being about a block away on fire.
The U-Haul truck had dually tires that matched the tracks found at the rural burn site.
So when I start to look at this, I am now, of course, wondering if the truck was used to clean up the crime scene, get rid of evidence, including perhaps Chad and the remains of Chad.
Coming up, was Chad's best friend responsible for his murder? And if so, why? And where was the rest of his body? Welcome back. As the hunt for a killer continues, police uncover more crime scenes and DNA evidence. Here now is Nancy Hixt with A Deadly Betrayal.
Days after Chad Largey's arms were found in an inner city dumpster, police were narrowing in on a suspect. But despite their best efforts, Chad's other remains were not located. It was devastating for his family. His little sister dealt with the trauma the only way she knew how.
It's worth the pain. I know he'd do it for me. I'm excited because I know I'll always have a picture of my brother, and it's close to me. It's right on my skin, never gonna go away.
Her brother was passionate about tattoos, which compelled her to pay tribute along with some of his closest friends in this very special way.
He loved them. He spent most of his time in the shop, all his spare time. He had the whole sleeve almost done of all gargoyles and skulls and stuff. And I don't know how somebody couldn't feel guilty especially if they watch and see how much it's affecting people, and like there's so many people that it affected. I'd feel more at peace if like I knew where he was, like if we had all of them. It's like a dream. And sometimes I do. I wish I'd wake up and my brother would be there, but he's not gonna be. So it's hard.
Meanwhile, Calgary police were working around the clock. As forensic crime scenes investigators examined the burned-up U-Haul, they found yet another key piece of evidence.
So in the cab of the truck, there were a couple of key pieces of evidence that had not been destroyed by the fire. One was footwear. And so we found some shoes that matched the footwear impressions that we found in the snow out by the burn site. So that was pretty telling that this probably was the truck that had been out there. We also found some labels, and they were labels that were from a jerry can. And they had some SKU numbers and some different numbers on there and dates and whatnot. We went to a particular store that sells lots of jerry cans, asked them, what does this mean? Can you help us understand these numbers? They were able to say, yes, we sell them. This isn't our number. This number is a gas station. From the gas station, we're able to look at how often do you sell these? When was the last time you sold them? Can we look at the video from that particular time? And we see Dean Commanda in the store buying the jerry can as well as buying gas.
At the same time, police were also looking for Dean Commanda's car.
They asked me to do up a poster, a need to identify or a need to locate for Dean's vehicle. It's disappeared from the U-Haul place. The U-Haul's been found burnt. The vehicle's it's not there. And from the investigator standpoint, what's in that vehicle? Like why is it disappearing? That bulletin was sent out not just within Calgary Police Service, but it was sent out to the rural RCMP detachments as well. It went Alberta-wide to see if anybody could locate a vehicle matching that description, or if they see a vehicle matching that description with the plate that's assigned to it.
And then another tip from the RCMP.
Strathmore RCMP responded to a vehicle on fire in the Chestermere area shortly after noon on Monday, January 21st. All indications that I have right now is that the vehicle is severely damaged.
The VIN tag that most people know about had been removed. However, most of our vehicles have multiple vehicle identification numbers, and so we were able to determine that this car that belonged to Dean was registered to Dean. Although the license plate had been removed, a VIN tag had been removed, it was his vehicle that had been torched.
Dean Commanda's burned car was taken to the Calgary Police Forensic Bay.
I think what happens is sometimes people think that maybe they watch too much TV or they read too many novels, and they think that killing somebody and destroying evidence is easy, and it's not. This individual took a lot of steps to try to cover their tracks. Obviously, that's what we do for a living as homicide investigators, is track down the evidence, and even if it's a small, minute piece of evidence, we're going to track it down. What we wanted to do was talk to Dean, especially in those early days, like, tell us what happened. What happened to your best friend? That seems like a pretty natural question that you would want to answer when it's your best friend. As the investigation is ongoing, I am calling Dean regularly to try to talk to him, and all fingers are pointing towards Dean as our offender.
Police needed to search Commanda's apartment.
I'm worried that we're going to lose more evidence if we don't get into his house and conduct a search of his residence.
By then, the burned out U-Haul and Commanda's car were all over the news.
It became clear to me that Dean wasn't cooperating. He didn't want to come in and talk to us, and I was worried that he was going to continue to destroy evidence. And so we did have a surveillance unit put onto Dean so that we could follow him.
Dean Commanda had to know police were closing in on him.
On one of the days, I phoned Dean and left him a message and told him that he was a suspect in our homicide, and that I needed to talk to him because I was going to arrest him. We had surveillance set up on Dean, and Dean and his girlfriend came out of his apartment building, and Dean was yelling as he came out. Couldn't really tell what he was yelling, but he was yelling something, got into the vehicle, and they drove very, very quickly to a hospital. Our surveillance units were able to get close enough into the hospital to hear that Dean claimed to have accidentally burned his hand and wanted treatment for his burned hand. Often what we will find is people that attack somebody else with a knife, especially if it's gruesome, is that there'll be knife wounds on the palm of their hand, typically from a knife slippage. And I couldn't help but wonder if this wasn't some other type of cover-up to try to cover up a knife slippage wound.
Police were granted a search warrant for Comanda's apartment.
That was the last place that anybody had seen Chad alive, is going into the back of the apartment building. We have a burn site where a lot of household items had been destroyed. That appears to be the U-Haul truck that Dean had rented, and that is now burned. And we have Dean, based on the receipt that we found out at the burn site, we have a picture of him buying minutes. We also have Dean purchasing gas and a jerry can, and that jerry can label was found in the truck. So when we take a look at all of these and we piece it all together, Dean is our #1 suspect. When it was safe for us to do so, we arrested Dean in a bar for a homicide, and his girlfriend at that time came with us as well so we could interview her. He was under arrest for second-degree murder. As soon as we knew that they were in custody, we then did the entry into the apartment and executed the search warrant for Dean's apartment. I was there, and from the hallway, looking into his apartment, I could tell that there had been a significant amount of destruction to the apartment. Just from the hallway, I could see carpet and underlay and baseboards that had been ripped out and were no longer there. Again, as we start to put these puzzles together, I'm like, well, that would explain the burn site. It would explain the doorstop that we found out at the burn site. And I was pretty convinced that Dean had spent some time trying to clean up the crime scene. When we did forensic examinations of Dean's computers, we realized that he had actually been Googling how to cover up a crime scene. He had been doing his research to try to figure out how to get rid of a body.
Coming up next, investigators go to unusual lengths to get the suspect to confess. Welcome back. The family of Chad Largy pleads with the accused killer for answers. Here's Nancy Hixt with the conclusion of a deadly betrayal.
While forensic investigators painstakingly went through every inch of Dean Comanda's apartment, he was interviewed by police. But Comanda refused to talk.
Well, as you can imagine, over that period of time, we're doing our best to keep the family updated on things that are going on in the file. We want to provide them as much information as we can. And so I did tell Chad's mom and Chad's sister that we had arrested Dean Comanda. We arrested him for Chad's murder, but no charges yet, as we're still working on the investigation. Now, you got to remember that Dean and Chad have been best friends for a long time. The family knows Dean. They know him well. And one of the things that Chad's mom said was, "Can I please talk to him?" I had never done it before, and I'm not sure anybody in the unit had done it, certainly not at that point. But we brought Chad's mom in to the interview. I don't know how else to describe it other than the plead with Dean to tell her where Chad was. You know, I wasn't sure if this would work, but what if it did work? And so why wouldn't we try? And why wouldn't we try to, everything we could to try to get Chad back to his family and a proper burial, which is what they were asking for. So I did drive out and I picked Chad's mom and sister up and drove them to the office. And I would say listening to her talk was gut-wrenching.
Please, Dean, please. Chad loved you. He looked up to you. I loved you. For taking care of him the way you did. Please, Dean, please. Please, Dean, please. I can't live with I miss my son. I need to know where his body is. I need to put him together. Dean, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Dean. He's my boy. I need to know what happened because I can't. I'm gonna die if I don't know what happened. Dean, please. He was sitting there and he couldn't look at us once. He broke down once and cried. I told him that I loved him and that Chad loved him. All he would say is, my lawyer told me not to talk.
It's Dean's right not to say anything, and he invoked that right. But, on a personal level, when you have a mom begging somebody that she's known for years to please tell me what you did with your best friend, my son, and he, although it was at point somewhat emotional, he chose not to say anything.
Meanwhile, the forensic examination of Comanda's apartment continued.
Not only photographing what had happened within that apartment, but also meticulously searching the entire apartment. And that included bags of clothes, it included boxes, it included seizing computers.
In the most unexpected location, police found Chad Largey's DNA.
They were able to basically get their head between the toilet and the bathtub in the back of the toilet, and they found DNA there, which they seized. That DNA ultimately was Chad's DNA.
They also found Chad's blood on Comanda's clothing.
They found numerous drops of blood that were on the pair of jeans, on the front part of the pair of jeans. We were later able to determine that it was Chad's blood that was on those jeans.
12 days after Chad Largey's arms were found, his best friend was charged with murder.
When we put it all together, we know that Chad was upset at Dean, that Chad was dropped off there, and when their phone rang 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes later, when Chad's dad came back to the apartment, they weren't answering the phone anymore. We know that by the condition of the arms, that there were what we would call defensive wounds, and that there was some type of altercation within that apartment. There's no doubt in my mind that that's where Chad was killed, and that Dean wanted to hide the crime and dismembered Chad, his best friend, and then did his best to clean up the crime scene, which was his apartment. One of the things that I did was I drove the route that I believe Dean had driven in the U-Haul. And when we compare that mileage to the mileage that was put onto the truck while Dean had it, there's about 200 kilometers that we can't account for.
Police believed in that unaccounted for mileage, Comanda disposed of the rest of Chad Largey's dismembered body. Dean Comanda didn't stand trial. Instead, almost a year to the date after he killed his best friend, he pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter. Comanda said they got into a drunken argument and Chad punched him, then grabbed a knife. He told court he was defending himself when he stabbed his best friend to death. Court heard the killing was excessive given the circumstances, But both the prosecution and defense acknowledged Commanda didn't have the intent to commit murder.
I don't believe that for 1 minute. I think that's a crop.
Commanda was convicted of manslaughter and committing an indignity to a body. The extraordinary measures he took to dispose of his friend's body and cover his tracks were described in court as cold and calculating. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but with credit for time already served, had 8 years left. Commanda declined to make a statement in court, convincing Chad's family he has no remorse.
I used to think he was a cool guy, but now I think he's scum. I despise him with every bone in my body. To look at him today just disgusted me.
Now it's time for my family to try to get on with our healing.
These are two friends, these are two best friends that had an argument that clearly led to a stabbing, a homicide, and dismemberment. Again, it's a waste of a life. He never did say exactly where he disposed of Chad's remains. He did say that he drove around outside of town and he put pieces of Chad into various dumpsters and whatnot, much like he did with the severed arms that we found.
Superintendent Cliff O'Brien said this crime will always stand out to him.
I think if you're working in any of these types of roles, forensic crime scenes, or as an investigator, certainly a death investigator, these files, when you're dealing with families and loved ones and you're dealing with all of the ripple effects of the impact, it inevitably does take a toll on you. There's no doubt about it.
Chad Largey's family was never able to give him a proper burial.
My mom is a mess. She's never, ever gotten okay. And come on, who would?
His sister was only 18 years old when Chad was killed.
I want everybody to know that Chad was an amazing person. He didn't deserve what happened to him.
She focuses on the good memories she has, the thick glasses he wore as a child, his love of hockey, and his pet bird, Melvin.
He ended up getting him one day and he would sit and he would whistle at him all the time. He was goofy. He had a really good personality, sense of humor. He was handsome. He was a great person.
She can't help but wonder what Chad would have done with his life had he been given the chance.
He made poor life choices when he was younger. He was in a group home and he got mixed in with the wrong crowd and made poor life choices. Money. He just wanted to make money. But then he started to realize that he needed to change, and he told me that just before he passed away.
Miranda also thinks of the man who was out looking for bottles, who, when faced with a horrific discovery, did the right thing and called police.
My brother would have been a missing person, and I would have never known.
In the final years of his sentence, the Parole Board of Canada deemed Dean Commanda a high risk to reoffend. Then, according to the Correctional Service of Canada, in 2016, while out on statutory release, he went AWOL. A Canada-wide warrant was issued for his arrest. He popped up months later on social media, posting about a tattoo business he was running in Winnipeg. He was arrested in November of 2016 with 12 days remaining in his sentence. Global News confirmed he was never convicted of breaching his conditions for those months, and he didn't have any extra time added onto his sentence. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.